Laci Denise Peterson is a 26-year-old female. She's 8 months pregnant. We're asking anyone with any information to please call our hotline number.
You have no idea where this is.
This is Scott Peterson, and the reason he's been questioned by the police is terrifying. Just a few days ago, his wife, Laci Peterson, was reported missing, and the entire family was desperate to find her. After all, she was 8 months pregnant, and their baby could be born at any moment. But this wasn't an ordinary disappearance, and what happened to Laci ended up being one of the most brutal crimes in the United States.
Laci's still alive. She's out there and someone's holding her, and these are critical, and we just need all of your help.
To understand how this case ended so tragically, we need to go back to the beginning of Laci and Scott's relationship. The two met in 1994 while they were studying at California Polytechnic State University. Laci, a young woman full of dreams and a love for life, quickly fell for Scott, and it didn't take long for them to get together. Just 2 years later, Laci and Scott decided to get married, and in 1996, they moved to Modesto, where they bought a beautiful home and seemed to be living the perfect life. Around family and friends, Scott always appeared to be a loving and dedicated husband. Meanwhile, Laci was the picture of happiness. She loved hosting family dinners, taking walks on the beach, and spending time with her husband. But there was still one thing missing for Laci to be truly happy. Ever since she found the love of her life, she had always dreamed of becoming a mother. However, Scott didn't want to have a child, so it seemed like it would never happen. This led to many problems in their relationship, and to put an end to the arguments, Scott finally agreed to the idea, though he made it clear he didn't want it at all. Even so, Laci was very excited about the news, and shortly after, she was already pregnant. To her surprise, she was going to have a boy, and she already knew exactly what she would name him: Connor. But what she didn't know was that her dream would be shattered in a horrible way. It all happened on Christmas Eve in 2002. Just a few weeks before Connor was due. Laci was very excited about the holiday and was busy preparing everything to host her family. Meanwhile, Scott decided he would take advantage of his day off to go to a nearby lake and do some fishing.
Talked to a couple guys fishing, asked me, to catch anything. I called Laci just as I was leaving the marina, home and mobile.
Hey, beautiful. I just left a message at home. 2:15. I live in Berkeley. I won't be able to get to Villa Farms to get that basket for Papa. I was hoping you would get this message and go on out there. I'll see you in a bit, sweetie. Love you. Bye.
Like getting home, so straight home.
But when Scott got home, his wife wasn't there. This was very strange, especially because Laci was already 8 months pregnant and shouldn't have been out alone. At that moment, Laci's parents started calling her friends and acquaintances, trying to find her. Unfortunately, no one had any idea where she could be. And when a few hours passed and she still hadn't come home, it became clear to everyone that something was seriously wrong. They called the police for help, but even they couldn't find her. Despite the officers working intensively, there were no clues about where Laci could be. And since she was pregnant, with each passing day, everyone grew even more worried. To help with the search, Laci's parents began putting up posters in public places and handing out flyers all over the city. They also organized fundraising events to finance the search efforts and offered a $500,000 reward for any information about her whereabouts. Of all the people involved, Laci's parents, Dennis Rasha and Sharon Rasha, were the most visible and active in the search. They participated in numerous TV interviews, expressing their desperation and pain, touching the hearts of people across the United States.
We'd like to thank all of you for being here and helping us trying to find our daughter. And we'd just like to send a message out there that whoever has her, please, please, please let her go. Bring her back to us.
We love her so much. We want her back. Please, let us have her back.
Yes. We want her and our grandson home safely and immediately, so please bring her back to us.
After these emotional appeals, every TV channel, radio station, and newspaper was focused on one thing: where is Laci? Are she and her baby safe? Unfortunately, no one had answers to these questions, but appearing on TV turned out to be one of the biggest helps in finally solving this case. After the news spread, many people began donating, and over 1,500 volunteers joined the search efforts.
In this Modesto neighborhood, a season of celebration has been interrupted by a search for a missing woman.
We may be running out of maps because we didn't expect this kind of turnout.
This reignited hope that Laci might finally be found and made it seem like luck was finally on her side. But as this was happening, people started to notice something very strange. Even though the whole family was doing everything they could to find Laci, Scott seemed completely uninterested in the search. Many thought this might be due to the sadness of the situation he was facing, but out of everyone there, he was the one who smiled the most and was always making jokes. Maybe this was just his way of coping with everything. Still, what he did shortly after Laci's disappearance is hard to explain. One day, Laci's mother asked Scott to go out and put up some posters, and Laci's brother decided to follow him from a distance to see how he would act. At first, Scott took the posters and went to a mall, where he bought an ice cream and sat down in the food court. He stayed there for about 2 hours, just sitting, and according to Laci's brother, when Scott finally got up, he simply left without putting up a single poster. These actions were completely different from what you'd expect from a worried husband searching for his missing pregnant wife. And it wasn't just Laci's family who found this strange. The police did too.
I gotta tell you, I was really expecting more from him. I was expecting him to start asking us, what have you been doing? Have you done this? Is this a priority? And so his behavior was a little bit different from other people that we dealt with. He just didn't seem to be as interested in what we were doing.
By this time, Laci had been missing for over a month, and her baby had probably already been born, making the situation even more urgent. Because of this, the police requested a search warrant for all of Scott Peterson's properties and assets. At first, Scott seemed to cooperate with the police, and things were going smoothly. But that didn't last long. Shortly after they began searching the couple's properties, investigators found a hairbrush that belonged to Laci and many other items containing her DNA. This would greatly help the police in their search. But for some reason, instead of feeling encouraged by the progress of the investigation, Scott began to feel very uncomfortable. This discomfort only worsened when his boat was searched. In the passenger seat, investigators found a long hair, which appeared to be a woman's, attached to a pair of pliers. Another strange detail was that the ropes for the boat were missing, which was odd since the boat was new. Even more unsettling, the police discovered bloodstains spread all over the boat's floor. Later, it was revealed that both the blood and the hair belonged to Laci Peterson, and they made this connection because of the hairbrush found at their home. Additionally, despite giving numerous interviews about the case, Scott had not appeared in any of them up to that point. This didn't make sense because out of everyone, he should have been the most worried and desperate to find her. All of this put Scott under the investigator's spotlight, as well as his own family. Still, until then, Scott had an alibi, a receipt proving he was far from home when Laci disappeared. Because of this, investigators began looking into other theories. The most shocking one was that Laci had been kidnapped by a satanic cult for dark rituals. Although the police didn't find evidence to support this theory, several neighbors alerted them about suspicious activities happening in the area. Quickly, the media began reporting this as a possible reason for Laci's disappearance, leading many residents to make reports about potential rituals and people acting suspiciously. However, despite investigating all the claims, police found no leads related to the case. Shortly after, it was confirmed that Laci had never been involved in any activities like that. Therefore, this idea was quickly dismissed, and the police began investigating a second theory, which was quite different. On the day Laci disappeared, neighbors saw her leave the house to walk the dog, and witnesses reported seeing her walking just a few minutes later nearby.
Out the window, and I could see her walking across the street. In the street, we don't have sidewalks here.
This information helped the police establish a timeline, as it was the last time Laci was seen alive. But of all the testimonies the police gathered, one stood out significantly. Some residents reported that a house on the Peterson street had been robbed at exactly the time Laci left home.
We had a burglary that was reported to have occurred directly across the street from the residence in question here on Christmas Eve morning. We have a witness that drove by the residence that lives in the area, who saw a suspicious vehicle and some suspicious people in front of the residence, and that was at 11:40 a.m. on that Tuesday morning.
Shortly after, the robber's car was spotted parked very close to the Peterson residence. With this knowledge, police began to think that Laci might have witnessed the robbery and confronted the criminals. Fearing arrest, the robbers decided to eliminate her and hide the evidence of the crime. This made a lot of sense at the time and would explain why she had vanished without a trace. With this in mind, the police quickly found the suspects and brought them to justice. The criminals, named Stephen Wayne Todd and Donald Glenn Pierce, were charged with several robberies in the area and with killing or conspiring to kill Laci. As a result, the detectives interrogated them to gather more clues. Despite the evidence collected and the thorough investigation by the police, the suspects claimed innocence and provided solid alibis that were later confirmed. Furthermore, detectives discovered that all the robberies they committed took place in completely different locations than where Laci lived, so they had no connection to her disappearance. And since there was nothing else to keep them as suspects, both were cleared of the charges. This left the police without any leads, so they returned to the beginning of the case and reevaluated all the evidence they had gathered up to that point. In total, there were over 10,000 pieces of evidence collected regarding the case. So this was no easy task. The first question they asked themselves was whether she had really been kidnapped or if she could have just run away. To answer this question, the police evaluated all of Laci's belongings and investigated her routine in the days leading up to her disappearance. At that time, they discovered that no documents or money had gone missing from the house, and Laci's purse was also left behind. Additionally, an analysis of cell phone records and neighborhood security cameras showed that Laci had been acting normally in the days prior. Laci spent most of her time preparing the room for her future son, Connor, buying clothes for him and getting ready for the holiday. This indicated that she was happy and excited to become a mother, not preparing to disappear. Therefore, the only likely theory was that she had been kidnapped, but unfortunately, when she was found, it was already too late. On April 18, 2003, nearly 4 months after her disappearance, the bodies of Laci and her son, Connor, were discovered. A man named Michael Lube, who was walking with his wife and dog, spotted something very suspicious in a marshy area of San Francisco Bay. As he got closer, he realized it looked like a small baby and immediately called the police. John Bueller was one of the first officers to arrive at the crime scene, and his account of what he saw there is disturbing. According to him, the baby had several bruises around the neck, suggesting that he had been forcibly removed from his mother's body shortly before he died. Just 1 day later, a woman named Elena Gonzalez saw a dog sniffing what appeared to be parts of a human body near the spot where the baby had been found. When Elena approached to see what it was, she discovered it was a human torso. This was the body of Laci Peterson, and the situation was just as horrifying as that of her son. Since the body had been in the water for so long, it became impossible for the police to determine the cause of death, and any evidence that could indicate who the killer was lost to the water. Still, one thing became clear to the forensic experts. The suspect was a cold, meticulous, and extremely cruel psychopath. He didn't just want to take Laci's life, he wanted her to suffer. This was evident in the way her body was found. It was completely mutilated, headless, with many parts missing. Unfortunately, since the body had reached a very advanced state of decomposition, this was all the forensic experts could discover. Nevertheless, the location where the bodies were found turned out to be the biggest clue to solving the case. It turned out that San Francisco Bay was precisely where Scott had gone fishing that day, which prompted the police to pursue him immediately. He almost managed to escape. When the police found him, he was in San Diego with $15,000 in cash, a wig, and a survival kit in his car. This indicated that he was likely planning to flee to Mexico, and if he was already a suspect before, this certainly made his whole situation much worse. This became evident during his interrogation. As soon as the body was found, Scott continued to deny any involvement in the disappearance and tried to use the fact that he had gone fishing as an alibi. However, the police were already prepared for this response and didn't make it easy for Scott at all.
You haven't fired any guns today?
No.
Okay, you guys haven't had any problems, marriage problems?
No.
Everything's good?
Mm-hmm.
You've been married 4 years?
Yeah.
Get your boat in. How long do you think you stayed in the water?
Felt like an hour and a half or so, but I didn't have.
Did you have a map for that area, or?
No.
Everything Scott said only made it clear to the police that he was hiding something and that they were on the right track. During the investigation, it was discovered that Scott had bought his boat just 15 days before Laci's disappearance, and that he had been researching ocean currents. As a beginner fisherman, it would make much more sense for him to research bait or good fishing spots. These pieces of evidence indicated that he had been planning the murder for quite some time, and that the boat was merely his means to dispose of the body. Additionally, the state of Laci's body when it was found suggested that it had been submerged in the water. Therefore, the police began searching for possible anchors that Scott might have made and used for this purpose. All of these details were enough to take him to trial, but until then, there was only one piece of physical evidence, while all the others were circumstantial. This meant that there was a good chance the defense attorneys could get him off the charges. But it was at this moment that the police made the most crucial discovery in the case. Scott Peterson had a mistress. Her name was Amber Frey, and unfortunately, she had no idea who Scott was when she got involved with him. She only found out the truth after seeing a news report showing that Laci's husband was her boyfriend.
I had no idea that I was being introduced to a married man. I had a big Christmas party that I had asked him to be a part of.
But that's just the beginning. As soon as Amber saw Scott on TV, she called the police and told them everything she knew. According to her, when they first met, Scott told Amber that his wife had died a month ago and that he was single. In reality, Laci was not only alive, but was also about to have his child. And it doesn't stop there. Remember that Scott didn't want to have kids? It seems that this story was very different when it came to his mistress. Amber was a mother to a little girl, and even knowing this, Scott wanted to be with her, claiming he had always dreamed of fatherhood and that he would love to be the father that Amber's daughter didn't have. This only proves how cold and manipulative this man was. Knowing this, Amber began to actively cooperate with the investigation. She provided recordings of phone calls and messages exchanged with Scott, which clearly showed that he was lying about everything. In one of these recordings, Scott pretended to have traveled to Paris to spend the holiday when he was actually in Modesto while Laci was missing.
Amber? Are you there? Amber? I'm outside. I'm in Normandy right now. I'll be in Paris tomorrow, and hopefully the phone will get better. Amber?
Hola. I said hola.
Such recordings helped the detectives build their case, and all this evidence was used against the suspect during the interrogation, serving as a crucial point in the case. With all of these clues, the investigation concluded that Scott was eager to start a new life with his mistress, and therefore meticulously planned the murder of his wife and child. Everything suggests that on that fateful day, Scott brutally murdered his wife and child, and then went to the bay to dispose of the evidence. There, he wrapped them in a piece of carpet, secured them with duct tape, and tied anchors to ensure they sank quickly in the water. Finally, in June 2004, Scott Peterson went to trial to pay for his crimes. The prosecution presented a combination of circumstantial evidence, devastating testimonies, and a dark portrait of a man willing to kill his pregnant wife to escape the responsibilities of fatherhood. They also argued that Scott had both motive and opportunity to commit the crime, and that his attempts to conceal the truth were evidence of his guilt. Meanwhile, Scott's defense argued that he was an innocent man and that the evidence presented was inconclusive. They tried to shift the focus to other theories and claimed that the case had been misinterpreted. The defense also argued that the media played a significant role in Scott's public condemnation, disrupting the entire trial. However, this did not help at all, as once everyone learned about the evidence, it became clear to all how guilty he really was. So, in 2005, Scott was sentenced to for double homicide, one for Laci and one for Connor. At that time, everyone's reaction was shocking. Scott's parents were devastated by the charges against their son, and even after the verdict, they continued to try to defend him. On the other hand, Laci's family was filled with deep sadness over Scott's guilt being revealed. Even as the months passed, they never lost hope of seeing their daughter again. But learning that she was dead and that the person responsible was her own husband left them feeling shattered and betrayed. Meanwhile, the verdict divided public opinion, with many questioning the trial and the role of the media in Scott's condemnation. This even led some people to start a movement to prove his innocence. Incredibly, it was spearheaded by Laci's sister, Amy Rocha. As a result, the death sentence was overturned in 2020. This brought the case back to court in 2023 when the California Supreme Court ruled that Scott could have a new trial. Regardless, it's likely that even with a retrial, he will still spend the rest of his life in prison. Recently, Scott made another attempt and gave his first interview in 20 years to discuss the case. Throughout the interview, he maintained his innocence, arguing that just because people disapproved of his infidelity, it didn't mean he killed his wife. Additionally, the Los Angeles Innocence Project agreed to take on the case to prove Scott's innocence. However, this will be a significant challenge, as many new discoveries are being made about the case even after 20 years, and numerous documentaries are being released, revealing even darker details about the crime. Despite this, lawyers say they have found DNA tests and never-before-seen documents that could suggest the crime was committed by someone else and completely clear Scott's name. In the end, Laci Peterson's case is a harsh reminder of how appearances can be deceiving and how a seemingly perfect relationship can hide dark and deadly secrets. Unfortunately, cases like this are much more common than you might think. On the screen right now, a video shows how the police discovered the terrible secret this mother was hiding.